Good morning. Welcome everyone. Happy Sunday. Welcome to Sunday Inspiration. My name is John Mark Shaw. I'd like to start by just saying that the divinity within me recognizes and honors the divinity in all of you. Let's take a deep breath. Just recognize that within us there is a still center, a peaceful center. That we always have access to this center through our breath in this moment. That nothing needs to change, for our hearts to open, for our minds to clear, and for us to connect with the presence, with a living presence that is always as close as our breath, closer than our breathing, nearer than our hands and feet, is what the scripture says. So welcome to all of you. Today's topic is a fresh start for the new decade. And I hope you all had a great holiday, whether you were celebrating Christmas or Hanukkah or Diwali or any of the other great celebrations this time of year, Kwanzaa. I know I had so much celebration that I actually had to go shopping yesterday to buy some bigger jeans. A lot of celebrating happened this time. So the dawning of a lot of eating occurred with me, as well as the dawning of the light, which we talked about last week. So I want to start by thinking back on your 2010 self. I'd love for you to imagine where you were at the beginning of this decade. What were you doing? Who were you being? Who were you with? What was your life like back then? For me, I'll just say that as I was entering this decade of 2010 to 2020, 2010 to 2020, yes, that I had just had a spiritual awakening experience, a calling experience, which I described last week in our talk. And in that experience, I was called to, what that voice said was speak the word, and that caused me to go into the ministry, to go into seminary to become an interfaith minister. So at the threshold of the decade, 2010, I was building a company, a restaurant company, and I was studying interfaith ministry. And I was starting to heed that call of that spiritual awakening, of that calling experience. And that calling experience led me really where I am today, but that was just the beginning then. At the time, we had founded a restaurant company, and we had one restaurant. And then which opened in 2007, and then in 2010, we opened two more within 6 months of one another. So that was a bit of a quantum year. Ultimately, we opened two more after that, and we had 5 restaurants which we opened in the course of that decade. I also was a single man when I entered the 2010 decade, and I met Donna in 2012, my wife. And then in 2015, my healthy, happy baby girl came along, Paloma. And so it was quite an incredible decade. And then in 2016, I turned 50, and I decided to leave my restaurant career to really pursue that calling that had emerged within me, that was still growing within me, to be a spiritual teacher, to help people grow into their greatness. And I left my career of 25 years in my company of 10 years to become a transformational life coach and an executive coach and a speaker and a minister full-time. So a lot happened in that last decade for me. I was nowhere near the same person that I am now in 2010. I was a single man, I was lonely, I wanted to change, didn't want to be single anymore. I had a lifelong yearning to be married and to have a child. And so, where were you in 2010? And I would love for you to take a moment and gaze back with appreciation for all that you created in this last decade. What a monumental 10 years it must have been. Some of you might have gotten married, some of you might have had children, some of you might have started businesses or moved or made major changes in your life. And so as you look back on that 2010 self, what would you like to say to that 2010 self? What message would you love for that self to know now that you're standing in hindsight with 20/20 vision, double entendre pun intended, looking back on 2010, what would you love to say to that version of yourself? For me, my message to that self was, good job. Way to go. I'm so proud of you. Look at all that you've accomplished. You were afraid of so many things. You were afraid to start your ministry. You were afraid to found your restaurant company and open restaurants. You were afraid to get married and have a child. But you faced your fears, and you took the steps that you could take and transform your life into what it is today. So what is your message for that 2010 version of yourself? Are you able to cast a kind eye to that part of yourself? To love that self, even if it was flawed, just like my 2010 self was very flawed? What would be the message that you would have for that 2010 self? And as we tune into that message, let's imagine, with all of the growth that has happened in these last 10 years, and now gaze into the future at 2030, and imagine, where will I be in 2030? If I imagined how much growth that I had over these last 10 years, how much change, how much incredible accomplishment that I've had over these last 10 years. And now I gaze forward and imagine I could have even more growth, an even more powerful quantum leap, an extraordinary decade where I do what I came here to do, where I express my gifts, I create abundance and wealth and success and joy and family and all of these wonderful things. Imagine 10 years from now where you'll be. For me, what I really want most, while there's many accomplishments I'd like to have over these next 10 years, what I would really love most is to be the happiest I've ever been. Happiness in each and every moment. Not a circumstance-driven happiness that is dependent upon it being sunny outside and not rainy, or my business going well that month or not going well, or any kind of condition-driven happiness. But what I would love most is to be just happy and grateful unconditionally in each moment of my life. To be vividly aware of the growth and the beauty that I have a healthy, happy baby and a wife, and I have a thriving business, and even when things are challenging, I would love more than anything else to make a decision to be happy. To be happy in whatever circumstance that I find myself, knowing that that happiness will not only create a better moment-to-moment experience for me, but it will actually attract to me all of the good things that I would love. So can I be willing to make a decision to be happy? In the Course in Miracles, it says that heaven, or you could say happiness, is a decision that I must make. Most people think of happiness as condition-driven. If I get a big present for the holidays, if I fall in love, if business goes really well, if it's a sunny day, if all of those things happen, then I can be happy. But what if I decided to live into an unconditional happiness? What would that be like? So one of the keys to happiness is to be easy on ourselves, to be loving and kind and forgiving of ourselves, to not be so hard on ourselves. And I know for myself, one of the things I would love to live into in this next decade is to be easier on myself. And so, in the effort to make a decision to be really happy, as we look back on these last 10 years, and on that 2010 self, and on everything that we accomplished, and also what we didn't accomplish, let's look back and rethink, which is really what repenting, or to forgive ourselves. Any place that we're holding resentment or judgment or a lack of forgiveness for ourselves, for what we didn't accomplish, what we didn't get right, where we fell short in any way. Before we take this quantum leap, this step into the future, into our greatness, it's very important that we release whatever resentments, whatever lack of forgiveness we might hold in ourselves. It's very loud. So, forgiveness actually means to give one perception up for another perception, right? To forgive is actually to have a shift in perception that removes a block in me to my awareness of my value, of my worth, of my connection to God, to spirit, to infinite intelligence, to the universe. Forgiveness is not something I do for other people who have done something wrong to me. Forgiveness is something I do for myself to open my channel, to unkink the hose when I am feeling resentment towards any experience I've had in my life for the last 10 years or even beyond. What's actually happening is that there's a kink in the hose of my abundance. There is a denseness, there is a resistance to more love, more abundance, more beauty, more success that I can have in my life. And so, to forgive, Course in Miracles says, is to give up that perception, to release the block in me. So let's take a moment and look at our 2010 self and our self in these last 10 years and release any judgment. I'll tell you my judgment story is, well, it was great that you did those things. You founded a successful company and you built a business and you got married and have children, but you did that in your 40s and 50s, and that's kind of late, right? You're kind of a late bloomer, aren't you? You know, and also you didn't have as much success as you wanted to have, right? You didn't even make as much money. You did okay, but you could have done so much better. So it wasn't good enough. You're not good enough. You were too old. It took you too long. You didn't do enough, right? Anybody can relate to those stories about ourselves?
Of course.
So, we all have them, but those stories actually pinch off the flow of success and abundance in our lives. They do not serve us. So, can we be willing to release those stories and to lean into gratitude and appreciation for all of the things that we did do? That I did build a successful restaurant business, that I did follow to the extent that I could this ministry, this calling, that I did have a miracle baby, that I did fall in love, that I did find a life partner. These are blessings. These are incredible blessings, but there's a part of us that's wired as humans to look for the negative, for the not good enough. Right? We're not grateful for what we have. So how can we learn to be happy by being grateful and unconditionally happy in the presence of all of our experience, and be kind to ourselves, to cast a kind eye, and to know that we are worthy of great success, and we are worthy of a great decade ahead, and that we are worthy of a fresh start. there's a principle that says that we can't outperform our self-esteem, our self-image, what we believe that we are worthy of. And so these old stories of not good enough that some of us hold on to about our past actually limit us from what we can achieve. And so part of the forgiveness, which is the giving one story of lack, limitation, not enough, not good enough, for another of gratitude, and I'm so proud of everything that I was able to do, and I love that 2010 version. To trade those stories builds within us a transformed self-image and self-esteem and self-worth, and until we take those steps to transform the story that we tell about ourselves, we can't have the more that we would love. We can't have the bigger business. We can't have the more financial success. We can't have the bigger impact, the love, the health, all of those things that we would love. So in forgiving, in acknowledging that we are human beings who are spiritual in our nature, and that we're having a human experience, and that we are doing the best that we can with the circumstances that we have, and that we can accept ourselves and love ourselves and be kind to ourselves, just like we want to do for our kids, but we can do that for ourselves. And know that happiness actually comes from an experience of appreciation of our present circumstances. It's contentment. The Tao Te Ching says, be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize nothing is missing, the whole world belongs to you. Mo Gadot wrote a book called Solve for Happy. And he created something called the happiness equation. And he said that happiness is equal to or greater than our perception of our life circumstances, the story that we're telling, minus our belief and expectation about the way things should be. So if we're telling a story about the way things are, that is not so positive, and then we are telling a story about the way things should be, well, I should have been further along by now, I should have been more successful, I should be in a bigger house, I should be not having to buy bigger jeans, I should be different than I am now. My perception of the way things should be actually impedes my ability to be happy now. Right? Our happiness is our story about present circumstances minus our expectation. And how many of us have these high expectations that make us ruin the present moment? Because it's not what we believe it should be. We're not accomplishing it. It's never enough. And so, in the Alcoholics Anonymous book, it says that acceptance is really the key to my happiness. It urges us to consider that exactly what is happening in my life right now is what is supposed to be happening. That my current experience is perfectly designed for the next stage of my evolution. My mentor, Mary Morrissey, says that the content of my life is the curriculum of my evolution. Eckhart Tolle says that life is bringing us whatever experience is most helpful for the evolution of our consciousness. And he says, how do we know that this is the experience we need? Because this is the experience we're having in this moment. And the entire universe has brought about the form of this moment because everything is connected to everything else. Imagine that. For us to think that something could be happening in our life that's separate from the perfection of the universe. Think of your body. Think of the incredible, magical, mystical, divine operation of just your body to allow it to breathe, to function. The incredible order that is displayed, the incredible intelligence of this universe that is on display just by the functioning of our bodies. How can we think that anything in our life is outside of that, is outside of intelligence? What if we could believe that there is intelligence in everything in our life, and that there is a lesson for us in everything, that what is happening is not happening to us, but it's happening for us, and that we can be happy and content with what we have. We can rejoice in the way things are. We can realize nothing is missing. We don't have to have an expectation about things being different than they are. We can accept and be grateful about the way they are, and then have a vision for the more love, the more beauty, the more success that we would love in the future. So let's cast a kind eye of forgiveness on all of our so-called sins. The word sin really means to miss the mark. People have used that in traditional religion to beat people up, and it's a terrible word that makes you contract, but actually it's an archery term that literally means to miss the mark. And to repent of our sins, which sounds so heavy in that language, we all think about that in religious context and it sounds painful. It really just means to rethink my mistakes, right? It's just a heavy-handed, it's been used in a heavy-handed way. It wasn't even written, it wasn't even spoken in a heavy-handed way, but we have come to know it through the institutions of religion that have used it as a punishment. But it's not a punishment. Let's just rethink our mistakes. Let's cast a kind eye and forgive ourselves for what we didn't accomplish, for the fact that it took me till I was 40s and 50s to get married and start a business, and do the things that I could do, so that we can have a fresh start. And there's always a fresh start available to us. A fresh start every year, a fresh start every moment, a fresh start with every breath. We can be born anew in each moment, and a new decade is a glorious opportunity for a fresh start. So now that we've released some of the judgment that we might have had on ourselves, let's cast our vision and our focus back to 2030. So just imagine, what would you love in your life? What would you love to create? The love, the relationships, the impact in your business, the message that you deliver to the world, the beautiful places that you will have gone, the family you have built, the impact on the world, the charity, the giving, what you have built over these last 10 years. Imagine who you will be in 10 years, the powerful version of yourself, the person who has, if you look back at 10 years and who you've become, imagine even more progress, even more growth in the next 10 years. Exponential growth. Imagine an extraordinary life. What would you love? Not what you think is practical, not what you think is reasonable. I would ask you to use extraordinary reason, not what Emerson and Thoreau called common sense or common hour reason. I would actually urge you to think about being an unreasonable person. Be unreasonable with your expectations of what you would love in these next 10 years. And when you go home today, perhaps you can write down your 1-year vision, your 3-year vision, and this 10-year vision. And then what would you love for that 2030 self to be saying to you now? What would that 2030 version of you say to you now? Maybe it would be the same. Good job. I'm so proud of you. Look at all you've accomplished. And imagine the fulfillment of that you have lived into that beautiful vision. And set your sights high. Set your sights on being extraordinary, on being unreasonable. And what's a good example of an unreasonable vision, of being unreasonable, of extraordinary reason? Walt Disney, to give one example of many, in the 1950s, most people don't know this, but he was fired from a newspaper job for lacking imagination. But he kept up and he got back up and kept going, and kind of ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Also, what happened next is that even though he had created some films, his film studio went bankrupt in the beginning. And so he had failure upon failure in the mind of some people. And so he had this vision to build Disneyland, right? And it was an extraordinary vision. And so what he wanted to do was buy thousands of acres of orange groves in the middle of what other people said was nowhere in California. And he had a failed business, and he had lost a job. And what he did have was life insurance. And so in 1950s, he borrowed close to $1 million, which is many millions of dollars in today's money, to do something unreasonable. And that unreasonable thing was to buy thousands of acres of orange groves because he believed people would come from around the world to the middle of nowhere for this Disneyland idea that he had. And the bankers thought he was crazy, and his family thought he was crazy. It was not reasonable to buy thousands of acres of orange orchards in the middle of nowhere. It was not reasonable to borrow against almost $1 million against his life insurance. But he did it. And the result is a place that thousands of people, and perhaps millions of people since the 1950s, have visited and had incredible joy, especially during this holiday season. And so, as Les Brown says, if you want to have unreasonable results, like living your dream and taking charge of your destiny, you have to be an unreasonable person. So I would ask you, my encouragement is, as you think about where you want to be in 2030 and over these next 10 years and who you want to be unreasonable. What is your thousands of groves of orange orchards, of orange groves, excuse me? What is your unreasonable vision for the life that you would love, for the business, for the love, for the impact, for the wealth, for the success, for the giving back? What is your extraordinary reason telling you that you can do when everyone around you might say, there's no way I can do that? As you walk out those doors today, know that what is within you is greater than any circumstance, any situation you're facing. If Walt Disney, with a bankrupt film studio after having been fired from a job, could borrow $1 million against his life insurance on an extraordinary and unreasonable vision, what can you do? People may tell you that it's unreasonable. People may tell you that you're crazy. But you know that there is a power within you guiding you and calling you. It's that power within me that told me to speak these words to you today, that told me to leave my safe and secure career in the restaurant business, to do something unreasonable, to help people grow into their greatness. And so as you think about that 2030 self, celebrate all that you have done. Know that you can do what you are called to do, that you can take charge of your destiny, that you can be an unreasonable person, and that you can live your dream. Happy New Year. Have a blessed New Year. Have a blessed decade. And thank you so much for coming today.